Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Cranky Gun Reviews. This particular video kind of falls under three different categories for videos that I've done before or series that I've done before. This is kind of a same caliber rifle and pistol, a rifle and pistol pairing, and also a why did I want this gun. So what are we talking about here today? Well, what you're looking at is a Marlin Model 45, also known as the Marlin Camp 45 in 45 ACP, and the Auto Ordnance 1911 A1, also in 45 ACP. Now, the reason that I chose these two to be paired up together, again, because they're kind of a rifle and pistol pairing, the reason is they both use 1911 45 ACP magazines. Marlin made the Camp model rifles from 1985 up until 1999, and the Camp 9 was probably a little bit more in favor than the Camp 45 was, mainly because it was 9mm. Those used the Smith & Wesson 59 series magazines. But again, to me, the appeal of the Camp 45 is that it uses the 45 ACP 1911 magazines. Now, this has a 16.5-inch barrel. It is micro-grooved like most of the Marlin rifles, so it has 16 lands and grooves. It has a very nice hooded front sight and a flip-up leaf adjustable rear sight. Now, this has probably a birch or a beech stock, kind of like their Marlin 60s, and it's a pretty well-built rifle. I like a lot of the features on this, but again, they kind of fell out of favor because they weren't the most popular guns out there. They were produced from 1985 up until 1999, and they did have some commercial success, but they're somewhat quirky, and I think at that particular point in time, the PC carbines really hadn't caught on very much. You did have other ones in that time period, like the Beretta CX4, which was another kind of quirky PCC of the time, but you didn't have anything close to what we have today with the Ruger PC carbine, the Kel-Tec Sub 2000, and the Smith & Wesson FPC. Now, this uses a Garand style safety. You have to put your finger in the trigger guard to push it off of safe, and then you pull it back towards you to put it on safe. This has a push button magazine release, and as I said earlier, this takes 1911 style magazines, so it's pretty cool. This one will accept a 7-round magazine out of a 1911 or a standard USGI model 1911. However, it is a little bit tough to get it to lock in. You have to hit it pretty hard. So I found that the 8-round magazines and the 10-round magazines tend to work a lot better in this Camp 45 model. But again, I will show here that the 7-round magazine out of my 1911 will slide right up into that mag well and lock in place. The whole magazine well and trigger assembly all are made out of a polymer with a whole bunch of metal rails and pieces inside to make it function. This one was pretty dirty when I got it apart, and as you can see, those old crappy destroyed nylon buffers, just like you have in the Marlin 60, made a mess inside the receiver. And that's one of the biggest problems that you see with the Camp Carbines. You have to replace that buffer with something like this. This is more of a soft rubber, not really rubber, but some type of a silicone buffer. And while I was in there, I bought a wolf spring kit for this, so I have 2 different weight recoil springs depending on what type of ammo you're shooting. I chose to put the lighter one in there, which I believe is around 16.5 pounds. I also changed the firing pin spring while I was at it, because you never know how worn out those are. If this gun is, 30 plus years old, you really don't want to have an issue with that thing failing in there. And then in addition to that, I also replaced the recoil spring guide rod, which helps out again to make sure that that new spring is nice and sturdy in there. This is what the new components look like, all cleaned up and ready to go back together. Here you can see the clean bolt with the new recoil spring and that buffer in there. And while I was at it, I actually found this Weaver rail at Cabela's. Amazingly, they had one of these things in stock for a Camp 9 or a Camp 45 carbine. I think it actually fits quite a few different models, and these are somewhere around $12 or $13, so well worth buying it. Bolts right on there. I made sure when I installed it, I put a little bit of blue Loctite on the screws so that it won't loosen up. And I actually tried buying some Pro Mag 10-round magazines as well. I've had mixed results with these. In some firearms, they don't work well at all, but I've had pretty good luck lately in my Smith & Wesson Shield 1.0 and my Ruger LC9S. They work great in those firearms. And I mean, 1911 magazines are typically pretty simple, but I have kind of come to the realization that if somebody can screw up an easy magazine, it's probably Pro Mag. But I'll give them the benefit of a doubt. Here you can see the top of that receiver. It's really squared off and it has holes in the top. The charging handle on the right-hand side kind of looks a lot like a Ruger 1022. And as I go down the barrel, you could see those flip-up rear sights that are adjustable, as well as that white dot front sight that's hooded. This does have a last shot hold open, so when you have an empty magazine and the last shot goes off, it will lock back. It'll stay back until you actually release that bolt forward with a new magazine. It has a loaded chamber indicator up on the bolt, so when it has a round in the chamber, it pops out a little red flag telling you that it has something in there. It also has a magazine safety, which I'm not really that fond of, because if for some instance the magazine ever pops out, it renders the gun useless. Here again, you can see that receiver that looks very much like a 1022, even though they're made by totally different companies. Now, like my Marlin 60 or my Glenfield Marlin 60, this has a JM marked barrel, and it is a micro grooved barrel, so it has those 16 lands and grooves as I mentioned earlier. And this gun is just pretty well made. It is a bit of an oddity, but it's one that I really have come to appreciate. It looks really cool. Again, the fact that it uses 1911 style magazines and the fact that you can have the same caliber and the same magazines in another firearm really lends itself to utility, whether you're using it for survival or hunting. Just to be able to carry the same firearm with the same magazines really makes it good to shoot. And the last reason I wanted to do this video, the why did I want this gun, really falls back to one of my gun heroes in the community, Mr. Paul Harrels, and let's look at his Camp 9 carbine.
Now this is a Marlin Model 9. It's a 9mm and it matches up with this Smith & Wesson Model 59. They not only shoot the same 9mm cartridge, but they also have interchangeable magazines just like the Beretta did. This is just kind of a more old school version of it. Now let's shoot these shoot and see targets at 25 yards and see what kind of group we can hold with this rifle. Now the safety on this Marlin is something similar to what you'd see on an M1 Garand or an M14 or a Mini 14, where you actually have to put your finger in the trigger guard to push the safety forward to disengage it. These days, that's a type of safety that a lot of people don't like. But let's see how it works. Now we got a malfunction.
While my Camp 45 is not exactly the same thing as the Camp 9 or the Marlin Model 9 that Paul Harrels had, this does really lend itself to a very similar firearm. It's the same exact form and function as his. The only difference is mine uses 1911 mags and 45 ACP. So again, that's the last reason why I wanted to make this video. This is a same caliber rifle and pistol video. This is a rifle and pistol pairing video. And this is also a why did I want this gun video. So thanks for dropping by and checking out this Marlin 45 or the Camp 45. Have a great day. God bless America. Make sure you support your 2A rights. Get out there and shoot. And you remember, if someone asks you to give up some of your freedoms for the greater good, remind them that freedom is always the greater good.